Hello there, people of the internet. Today we are discussing the 270 Winchester, which is, well, just a 30-06 that has been necked down to a 277 diameter bullet. I have some ballistic charts and some history to talk about with this cartridge, but before we do that, I want to tell you guys that this is a part of a little video series I'm doing to try and earn my way up to 100,000 subscribers. So if you want to help me get there, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, especially if you like content like this, because you're among the right crowd. Okay, so the 270 Winchester. Let's talk about a little bit of history behind this before we get into its capabilities. So whenever we talk about the capabilities of this, we're going to be discussing it for hunting purposes, not any sort of what-ifs as to whether or not, it might or have done well as a military cartridge. I mean, that might be an interesting video in itself. As a matter of fact, I might do that. What if the military adopted this cartridge, that cartridge, or this other cartridge? That's actually a really good idea. I'll have to be sure to jot that idea down. Okay, so the 270 cartridge is actually an incredibly old one. It is reaching 100 years old at this point, and it was originally launched in 1925, I believe. In 1925, it went up against the 30-06 in terms of popularity, and it did not do so well for the most part since the military was using 30-06. Of course, the 30-06 is going to completely overshadow the 270. Of course, well, this wouldn't really be a 270 video if I didn't bring up Jack O'Connor. Jack O'Connor was a man who used this cartridge very successfully, and he's one of the people who made it incredibly mainstream and incredibly popular. He used it for about 40 years and published a lot of material on it. And so as a result of that, the 270 got incredibly popular. Now, it's a very, 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 very good cartridge, but it seems to be falling out of favor in comparison to some other cartridges that are out there on the market, be it, based off of things for popularity like 308 or 30-06, or based off of performance and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the performance of our 270 round. And I got a couple of different loadings here with a couple of different grain weights that we're going to go ahead and take a look at. Now, of course, there's going to be variations based off of what company it is that you're getting from and whether or not the ammunition has been hand-loaded and is potentially to spec. There's a lot of different loadings out there that, you could push projectiles much faster and much more effectively than the factory SAMI specifications allow them to be pushed. So whenever it comes to the 270 round, for the most part, you're going to see these loaded with a 130 grain projectile. That there has become the common de facto standard loading for your 270 round. 130 grains, and it's going to be traveling at about 3,100 or so feet per second. I've seen some loadings a little bit lower. I've seen some loadings a little bit higher, but approximately 3,100 feet per second for that 130 grain projectile. And this 3,100 feet per second is going to give you about 2,900 or so foot-pounds of energy transferred onto your target at the muzzle. Now, they do make lighter weight projectiles for the 270 round if you want to have more velocity and more energy transfer onto your target based off of that velocity. Personally, I think for every application that I would be using the 274 in my area here in Florida, I think a 100 grain projectile would be optimal, unless I'm going after, say, medium game or something like that. But for the most part, I go pig hunting and maybe hog hunting, and I just don't really go deer hunting all that much. And whenever I do, I take maybe 2 or 3 deer a year. It's really not all that much. We're only allowed 5 deer a year here in the state of Florida. And, well, that's a story for another time. For the most part, I would say the 100 grain projectile for the 270 round is going to be optimal. You're actually going to get a fair amount of energy transferred onto the target, but you're also going to get not a whole lot of recoil from that cartridge being fired. It's going to travel at about 3,500 feet per second, which is quite the screaming velocity. You got to figure 5.56 gets its capabilities from velocities. 55 grain projectile of 5.56 is going to travel at about 3,200 or so feet per second. So this 270 round is almost twice the weight, and it's traveling 300 feet per second faster than the round, the 5.56 round that relies on velocity to get its power. So that's quite a bit of energy transferred on a target. That's actually about 2,700 foot-pounds of energy transferred onto your target with that lightweight 270 round. That is quite a lot of energy transfer and not a whole lot of recoil. Those lighter weight bullets are just a pleasure to shoot. Now, if I am going after a heavier game, I will steer towards a 130 grain projectile just because of commonality and whatnot. But I have had good luck with 140 grain projectiles. There actually was a time where I went up to Tennessee and I had a 270 with me. It was not mine, it was a buddy of mine, but I had 140 grain projectiles, and those seemed to really do the job up there in Tennessee. As a matter of fact, I might save that story for another video. That would also be a really cool time. As a matter of fact, I'd like to get my buddy on the channel who I went hunting with up there. But 140 grain projectile, that's going to travel about 2,900 feet per second. So a little bit slower, which makes sense because it is a heavier projectile. Your heavier bullets are just harder to throw. A good way to visualize this, go outside and pick up 2 rocks. Pick up a really small, lightweight rock, or pick up a very large, heavy rock. And throw them both with the same amount of effort, the same amount of force. Since the 270 round will be running at a certain pressure, it would have to be that same amount of force. And you'll find that the lighter weight rock is much easier to throw than the heavier weight rock. And that's why the heavier weights, bullets and projectiles tend to travel slower, simply because they are harder to throw. However, this 2,900 foot per second 140 grain projectile is going to be having about 2,700 foot-pounds of energy transferred onto its target whenever it reaches its target. So speaking of reaching its target, how effective is the 270 out at long distances? And whenever I say long distances, I mean within the realms of what most people would still be shooting at. A lot of people, they say long distance and they're like, all right, minimum for long distance is 1,000 yards. Well, long distance for me and the average shooter, I'd personally say is about 300 yards. Like that 300 yard mark is about where most people start to tap out, unless you are exceptional for shooting at long distances. So that 140 grain projectile at 2,900 feet per second from a 270, if we go out to that 300 yard mark, we're going to see a 21-inch drop. So that's a little bit under 2 feet of drop. The beauty about gravity is everything falls at a consistent rate. So we can gauge how far it is that we need to hold over an object at a certain distance if we know the velocity of our object, and if we know the velocity of our projectile, and we know where to hold to make a hit because gravity is consistent. So at that 300 yards, we're going to see 21 inches of drop, a little bit under 2 feet. And we're still going to have about 2,300 feet per second on that 140 grain projectile. So it's still going to be traveling pretty gosh darn fast. Now, this 2,300 feet per second is going to transfer to about 1,700 foot-pounds of energy onto its target. As a good general rule of thumb, you want to have about 1,000 foot-pounds of energy transferred onto your target if you are hunting deer. Now, of course, they can be taken out with significantly less, especially with proper shot placement, but just that general rule of thumb, that 1,000 foot-pound of energy, is what you want. And 270, that 140 grain projectile, absolutely has it at that 300 yard mark. It has almost twice the amount of energy that you're going to need to be able to put down that deer. So people have been hunting with 270 for a very long time, and they've been very effective with it to the point to where it's made some people incredibly popular. 270 is a flatter shooting round than 30-06, although 30-06 will be able to fire heavier bullets, and 30-06 tends to have more energy transfer onto your target. 270 does have its own share of pros, like for example a flatter trajectory and less recoil, since you can simply fire lighter weight bullets, since the bullets are going to be a smaller diameter. So all that being said, all this has led up to, yes, I definitely recommend 270 for hunting, since it is absolutely adequate out at the distances that most people would max out at. It definitely has a variety of different cartridges or different projectiles that you could use in this cartridge, and it has a variety of different velocities that you could pick from depending on what game it is that you wanted to go after. I imagine that there's probably larger and heavier bullets than 140 grain projectiles. And I imagine that they are dramatically more capable beyond the 300 yard mark, which I am and most people like tap out at. So all this being said, thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. What are your opinions on the 270 round? Go ahead and let me know down in the comments below. I know for a fact that this right here works incredibly well, although I think I've only shot at things within like 100 yards with 270. And pretty much anything, any kind of rifle cartridge within 100 yards would be adequate enough if it's classified as a rifle cartridge. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you guys on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.